Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. All right, I hope everybody is doing well. I certainly am, and I appreciate you tuning in and watching this video. I've been trying to think of what I wanted to say about this past week, and a whole lot of thoughts came through my mind, but I settled on this one. Trump and MAGA made systemic governmental racism much easier. Let me say it again. Trump and MAGA made systemic governmental racism much easier. They released so many executive orders that impacted the federal government as it relates to African Americans in such rapid pace, I couldn't keep up with it all. I have so many things to say about what has been done this past week, but so much came out, and I'm sure so much more is about to come, that it's just going to take me a couple of days to get my head around it all, because I'm not the one who's trying to say the first things. I am trying to say what is thought out and what informs you the most. What really allows you to look inside legally from a Black civil rights perspective, what has occurred. All right, so with that said, let's go to another screen. I want to show you exactly what I'm saying. So Trump and MAGA this past week made legalized systemic racism much easier. What is systemic racism? And I have to ask that question because, look, too many people, African-American people, still don't understand that the real issue is systemic racism, not just individual racism, but systemic racism. So let's try to define it. Frederick Douglass described it this way. He said, quote, "In nearly every department of American life, Black Americans are confronted by this insidious influence. It fills the air." All right, it fills the air. So every breath you take, you're breathing in systemic racism. There's nowhere you can go where there's not systemic racism. It's pervasive. It meets them at the workshop and factory, so it's on your job. When they apply for work, it's in the Human Resources office. It meets them at the church. Even at your church, you're dealing with systemic racism. At the hotel, when you want to book a room, you're dealing with systemic racism. At the ballot box, you're dealing with systemic racism. And worst of all, it meets them in the jury box. And he said worst of all because when there's systemic racism in the jury box, then the criminal justice system is just not going to be for us. The Black American has ceased to be a slave of an individual. It's not about just the racism on the plantation. Mr. Douglass says, but has in some sense become the slave of society. Again, something that is really, really, really pervasive everywhere you go. Hello, everyone. I got great news. The merch is finally here. We've been waiting and waiting, but we can finally begin branding our channel. But we need your help to get our brand out there. If you like what we provide and like what you see, please go to the channel and grab your hoodie, your t-shirt, your mug, and we got more designs and products on the way. Just visit our YouTube channel at the Defiant Lawyers Network. Also, we will donate a portion of each dollar you spend on our merch towards some nonprofit. And remember, as always, stay woke. You've heard me say, it's not the shark in the ocean, it's the ocean itself that contains this systemic racism that I'm talking about. Hence, in a nutshell, systemic racism is the pervasive discriminatory practices and procedures embedded in the institutions of America, including the federal government. So back to my initial statement, Trump made it easier for the institution of the federal government to become all white. There are no efforts any longer set aside to try to include, to try to create a diverse, racially diverse workforce in the federal government. And Trump hasn't stopped there, right? They formed an organization, they formed a law firm to pressure and to force private entities to also abandon their DEI measures, Target being the last one. Now, I have a separate video coming out talking about Target and whether or not losing DEI hurt Black people specifically, because there are people out here who say losing DEI helps Black people. I'm going to address that in an upcoming video. All right, let's keep looking at this. So Trump made it easier for the federal government to become all white. There's no longer any incentive, any sort of rewards or awards for the federal government to include African-American employees. And when you think about the fact that Trump is trying to gut the federal workforce and replace those workers with his political appointees and MAGA followers, then that's going to result in a whole lot of unemployed African-American people and no incentive to replace those unemployed African-American people with other African-American people. The economic consequences for this, for African-American communities, will be great. And we are talking about a community that already has so much less wealth than white Americans. I don't even see why they're so upset about DEI when they control nearly 99% of the wealth in this country. I don't get it. I mean, we control, last I read, from 3 to 5% of this nation's wealth. That means at least 95% of this nation's wealth, whites control. Yet they keep hammering, they keep hammering, they keep hammering. So how did Trump make systemic governmental racism easier? Well, largely by executive action. One, trying to eliminate birthright citizenship. I have another video coming out showing you that birthright citizenship, trying to eliminate birthright citizenship, does not just impact Hispanics. When you hear someone say that, you know off the bat that you are not talking about an attorney. That is not a person who has studied the law and knows the Constitution. What else? Trump has made systemic governmental racism easier also by planning to terminate employment for federal employees, like I just said, including many Blacks, getting rid of what they call the deep state. Also by rescinding DEI initiatives within the federal government, as I just alluded to, by ordering all federal DEI officers to be placed on immediate leave pending elimination. So all those folks who look after the DEI programs, they're being fired basically and are right now on immediate leave. They no longer have jobs because there will no longer be any DEI programs for them to oversee. By rescinding a key civil rights rule ordered by Lyndon Johnson in 1965, a huge executive order that essentially put DEI in federal contracting, basically, which is very important. And I showed you in a previous video that Blacks received in 2021 about $9 billion in federal contracting. It wasn't as much as the other groups, but it was still $9 billion. And we just needed to continue to fight for more. But losing $9 billion for the African-American community is significant. It's significant. All right, let's go back. By suspending all civil rights investigations except for reverse discrimination cases. So if an African-American person, and we deal with this as a civil rights firm, if someone walks into our doors and has a civil rights complaint, and a legitimate one, one that we believe is triable, viable, right now, what we will get from the local U.S. Attorney's Office is we're not doing that right now. We're not opening any new investigations. We're not filing any new civil rights cases. We're not opening any new civil rights investigations at all. Sorry. Elections have consequences. All right? So that's really, really, really serious, because when one of us is violated in some way, when our civil rights are violated, we have to go to the United States government because they handle all civil rights investigations. Well, right now, Trump has it all shut down. I covered that in a video a couple of days ago. See, this is serious, folks. Suspending consent decrees. I talked about that also. Those are agreements between police departments and the federal government to stop their pattern and practices of violating the civil rights of African American people. Suspending PEPFAR, which is a very successful program that helps fight HIV in Africa. President Bush, the younger man, he put that in place, and it has saved over 20 million lives in Africa. Trump reportedly has rescinded that program. Rescinding civil rights rules in the Department of Education promulgated by Biden. Any civil rights rules that Biden put in place, be it in the Department of Education, be it in HUD, wherever it is, Trump will order them rescinded. You see, all of this is targeted toward us African Americans. Directing the Attorney General to seek reversals of U.S. Supreme Court precedents that limit application of the death penalty in state and federal jurisdictions. Huge. One of the celebrated and famed Black civil rights attorneys, Bryant Stevenson, of the Equal Justice Initiative, successfully argued against putting juveniles to death. Well, Trump here is directing the AG to seek reversals of U.S. Supreme Court cases. In other words, try to get SCOTUS to change its mind about putting people to death, for example, juveniles, or those who have mental issues. This is really something. And if you don't know, African Americans are on death row disproportionately. And much more is coming, folks. Much more. So these anti-Black measures indicate dark and dangerous days are ahead for our community. Many Blacks don't really even understand what happened. And a lot of them are diminishing or dismissing what Trump did this past week. And yes, some helped him do it by not voting or voting for him. All right, so as I said in the opener, yes, Trump and MAGA have made it much easier for systemic governmental racism to abound. And this is just the first week of this man's administration. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video. And as always, remain woke.